55 speakers, 15 panels. This is the last one of the Responsible Tourism panels at this year's WTM. I think it's the third year that we've done volunteering, and I suspect that this may be the last time that we do it for a few years. There's a lot of other subjects crowding in to the agenda. Just to remind the panelists, although you do already know this, the whole session is being videoed. It will probably be on the web for the rest of eternity. So there will be a record. The previous sessions, many of them have also been videoed and are available on the web. And for those of you who work in education, they're quite a useful teaching resource, as well as being useful for the industry. So we're very keen to have a very good session with this final one. We've got 5 speakers for you, one of them from Brazil, where we run a session, and we'll be running a session, in fact, in April on volunteering for the Brazilian World Travel Market. I don't want to say any more. I really want to get the presentations underway. The speakers have been told they've each got between 7 and 8 minutes, which means that if they're well behaved, and I will tell them if they're going over, but if we get through on time, there will be plenty of time for your questions and for discussion at the end. So Mariana, might I ask you to come and begin? Mariana is a lecturer at the University of Sao Paulo, which, if I remember correctly, is the most preeminent university in Latin America. Oxford and Cambridge need to watch out. Over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Professor Harold, for the invitation. Thank you, my colleagues from the panel. English is not my first language, so I would ask you to just overlook my mistakes, and I try to make it as correct as possible. Talking about volunteering opportunity, I decided to use a Brazilian point of view, understanding that there are different point of views in respect to volunteer. In Brazil, volunteerism is strictly related to religion. So if you belong to a church, then you naturally will devote some of your time to volunteer activities. The volunteer tourism is something recent, and we have less than 5 Brazilian companies working on volunteer travel. But we do welcome a lot of volunteers. So my brief presentation will try to talk about why volunteer tourism, where to go, what to do, where to choose from, and how to choose from. And I also thank you, Professor Harold, to ask me to begin that, because again, as a lecturer, I don't have business expertise in volunteer. I'm just talking from the research point of view. So why do we go after volunteer tourism? Mainly because we want to have a life with purpose, so then vacations with purpose. There's dealing or spending a lot of my time with students, and I have some of my actual students and previous students here in the first row. We learn from these youngsters that they are searching for purpose, not only money, not only a job, but meaning for their life. So if they have a chance to travel to different places in the world and find purpose in life or in what they are doing, that would make some sense. Make a difference in someone else's life. This has a little to do with the religion aspect I mentioned, but also when you know that if you can do something to improve someone else's life, it will be amazing. Give back once you assume that you have got more than you need, so you can return the society, the communities. And also community services matter, communities matter. So if you are aware of what you have today and you know that in somewhere else there is need of help, you can go. Where to go? So mainly when we talk about South America, the well-known programs are in Bolivia and Brazil, in Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. If you have a quick search on the internet, mainly Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil will come. In Brazil, as I mentioned, most of the programs are internationally managed, meaning some tourists went to Brazil on vacation, they were in contact with the Brazilian reality, and they decided to set up a program or to join an international program to help the communities they have visited. What are the focus? What to do as a volunteer? Mainly child care. We have less than we need government support for mothers with babies. So they have to be back to work after 3 or 4 months after the baby is born. And they have not a place to leave these kids. So some of the volunteer programs set up child homes for commercial hours, and then you can volunteer helping, taking care or playing with those kids. Most of the programs involve education, teaching English to the communities, because as the government says, English should be our second language, and we have English as regular curriculum item, but nobody speaks English properly. So with the World Cup and now with the Olympics, there is plenty of room to teach English to everybody. When we talk about the favelas, the slums, the community capacity building, so teaching them basic skills, how to build some community centers, technology, internet use, there are plenty of room for that as well, and wildlife preservation, which is the international image of South America. In Brazil as well, we have an aspect that relates to sports. So you can volunteer teaching kids how to play soccer or play rugby, which is now being inserted in our sports culture. Where to choose from? If you search for South America and some of the most appealing projects, at least these 5 organizations are offering some of the programs. The Global Volunteer Network, Transitions Abroad, Cross-Cultural Solutions, Amizade, and Cooperatur. I did not include people and places, and I did not include any of my colleagues from the panel because I learned that they would speak about that. More than just knowing where to choose from would be how to choose from. And for me, I would put the peer evaluation in first, but international reputation. Like in this era that we are living in, we have to check the credentials, to see who is supporting these organizations, to see if this is not just a marketing program, not a volunteer per se. If we have the endorsements, not exactly the sponsorships or the partners, but endorsements for other peer organizations. In the peer evaluation, I went online on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter to check those organizations in the previous slide. And it's amazing that they have less than 100,000 likes each, which is few for like 13 billion users for Facebook. 100,000 is few. So there's something to dig in to understand, do volunteers share their experiences online? Are they happy with what they have achieved? Did they share photos? In some of those, there are some interesting cases, but I felt that it was a poor quantity. We should have more. And naturally, intensive research. Beginning with culture difference. For instance, for the American market, the North American market, they would understand volunteering as dedicating their time. So they do not assume that they could pay for the ticket or for lodging or for food. Like, I am traveling, I'm a volunteer, you pay for my expenses. In other more structured, responsible volunteer projects, you naturally will have to pay. Of course, it will be a discounted rate or a special rates, but there is something to be paid. And of course, there will be some of the international programs, very few, that you are invited to join some program. So do this research if you're interested. Try to talk to as many people that have been there or that have been in contact to someone, and to decide what is best for you or what suits your interests. And how to choose from? That's the tricky question. For you to have, I think, a fulfilling experience, the first thing would be the express commitment to responsible practices. So there are some of the volunteer tourism organizations that are already using the word responsible tourism. So these, I would say, are the first one in your list. Those that offer you support throughout the whole process, from the beginning, when you have doubts and you need to decide where to go, through the end, feedback. What was your experience? How can you share this with others? Transparency on funding. So you need to know, if you're paying for the program, where the money is going, how the money is being used. Clear goals, orientation, and of course, supervision. If you're a volunteer, it does not mean that you know what you're going to do. It's something that you like to do, something that you could help, but maybe, for instance, childcare. There are some specifics on childcare. Wildlife conservation as well, so you need to have someone teaching you. And most of all, specifically in Brazilian cases, there are, for instance, there is one specific favela in São Paulo that receives all the programs and all the money. So it's almost like a Class A favela, and it's completely different now from all the other favelas. So we are now trying to deviate people from this favela to go to the other in need. The same for some of destinations. There is not only one city for rainforest programs. There's not only one city for childcare. So try to talk to Brazilians and ask them to suggest, of course, if you're going to Brazil or to Peru or to Bolivia, other locations in need. Okay, well, it was basically that. This is my email, and I'm also on Twitter. Thank you, Harold.
Thanks very much indeed, Mariana. David, could I ask you to come and speak next? Our technician has set this up absolutely brilliantly.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Coles, and I am the volunteer coordinator at the London School of Economics. You should also know that I wear another couple of hats. I'm also a trustee of a charity called Kickstart Ghana that works on sports and education in Ghana. And I'm also on the advisory board of the fantastic Impact International, which I recommend you go and check out if you're interested in overseas volunteering. But mainly today I'm going to be talking to you in my role as the LSE volunteer coordinator. And to be honest, that gives me a fair amount of power in some ways over which organisations can speak to LSE students. So on our vacancy board, we have about 25,000 students have access to looking at volunteering opportunities. And basically that final yes or no comes down to me. So we're going to be talking about that and how I make my decisions. So why is it important that we choose a responsible opportunity and or organisation? Well, I think the main thing that volunteers often get back to me about is that expectation gap, where they thought they're going to be doing one thing and they ended up doing something very different. And that expectation gap was too big for them. So making sure that this expectation gap is much smaller. We've heard about fundraising. We want to make sure that if a student or volunteer is doing fundraising for an organisation, that money is going, where you'd like it to go. And finally, and probably most importantly, you want to make sure that the people that you're working with, i.e. the beneficiaries of that charity, really are benefiting, and how can we go about doing that? So at the moment, it might sound quite simple just looking at those three things, but why are young people, and in fact people of all ages, a bit confused about volunteering overseas? Well, if you were to Google image volunteer in Africa, this is the first top page that comes up on Google Image. And basically all I can see here for volunteering in Africa is young African children cuddling white adults, which to me seems a little bit of an odd concept, that the only way of volunteering in Africa is going to hug a child. Well, through working at LSE and through working at Kickstart Ghana, I can assure you there's no document that says hugging children is part of international development. That's a very odd concept. It's not really one that would take hold. And when LSE students come to me because they want to go and work at the UN, they want to go and work at the IMF and the World Bank, they don't want to go and hug a child. But when you Google, this is the first thing that comes up. So what we've had is a situation where the opportunities that have been advertised to young people has absolutely exploded, but the opportunities that will make a sustainable difference are much, much smaller. That's not to say these ones don't exist, though. So if you do want to advertise to London School of Economics students, these are the bare minimum terms and conditions that you have to adhere by. And this isn't just for overseas volunteering. This is exactly the same for UK charities volunteering. We volunteered at that ship across the road 3 weeks ago, and all these terms and conditions were exactly the same. So they have to be a registered charity, have relevant insurance, health and safety policies and risk assessments completed, child protection and vulnerable adult policies, providing thorough training, inductions and support after they volunteered, and have a named person who's responsible for the supervision and support of volunteers. And as I said, this is our bare minimum. If you can't do that, you're absolutely not getting access to our students in the future. And what else do I look for when I'm looking at a new organisation? I think about the impact that they're making. Is that clear? And there's too many volunteer organisations out there that are talking about the impact on the volunteer and not the community that they're working in. I want to know what difference that they're making. What's their model? How do they see success in the future? What is their mission? And if their mission is to send volunteers overseas, that's raising a few questions in my head, as that indicates to me they're thinking about the volunteer first and the beneficiary second, when really any responsible organisation notices a problem and then thinks, how can I address that? That might include volunteers. So thinking about it in that way around. I read their annual report and look at their previous successes. Do they let people volunteer in areas that they would not be qualified for in the UK? So would you allow a young person in the UK to walk into a state institution, orphanage home, and just let them start hugging kids and working with them? Absolutely not. And there's no way I will let an organisation advertise to LSE students where they're saying they're doing that in another country in the world. How do they work with local people? Is there a local board? How do local people feedback? How are those projects decided on? And the last two things, which I'm just going to go into a little bit more now, is their use of imagery and the vocabulary that they use to describe their beneficiaries and local partners. So for me, here are a few examples of best practice. The top image is taken from Accounting for International Development. And what we can see here is 3 adults having a meeting. Looks like there's some good talk going on there. It shows that these people are working together as an equal level. And on their website it says, if you're interested, click and take the first small step to being a volunteer. Setting those expectations straight away. And on their website they say, we would strongly recommend you attend a workshop. Don't sign up now, don't sign up tomorrow. Come along and sign up, come along to a workshop, find out what we're doing and how you can get involved. Another good one is Lively Minds, and on their website they say, you'll be working alongside our staff team, you'll be sharing your skills and abilities and to improve the confidence of local women and children. So what they're using here is a very sort of inclusive language, not saying you're going to save the world, not saying the beneficiaries can't do anything themselves. People are working together. These are some examples of perhaps not such quite good practice. And the top one is working with children in Ghana. Volunteers with qualifications and experience are welcome, but you do not need to have either to volunteer. Now, if that was my child, I wouldn't be particularly happy if someone with no qualifications and experience was suddenly looking after them for 8 hours a day. And I'm sure no one else in this room would either. And the second one, and I appreciate you might not be able to read that writing, it basically says how to sign up. You go on the website, enter your personal details, pay £140, you receive a welcome email. 10 days later, you'll receive your placement details. Again, that is working with children. 20% off, you quite often see this. Let's say volunteering, it's not a product that you buy off the shelf. It's not like that. You shouldn't be looking at 20% off. It's something you should be qualified to do and get involved in. So to give you an example of someone that I have worked with through my work with Kickstart Ghana, this is Luke. He's a qualified football coach. He's very interested in going into that in his career. He went out to Ghana for 3 months in the summer of 2013 and worked with the local football coaches there, where his job was to take sessions but also to swap ideas with them, make sure that they were learning, that he was learning from them. And he also created a training pack that the volunteer coaches in Ghana could use, and also any future volunteer coaches that we send out to Ghana can use as well. And he said very kindly that we're a charity with specific goals, and volunteers really have to go through quite a selective process, and this is how we keep our standards so high. Another volunteer that I'd like you to meet is Coco, because one of the things through Kickstart Ghana, we have 3 different types of volunteers. Volunteers that work in the UK for us, never go to Ghana, and volunteers that do go from the UK to Ghana if they've got specific skills. And finally, and probably most importantly, is our volunteers that work in Ghana. They're the ones making a difference to their local community, more so than I ever could, even though I dedicate a lot of time to it in this country. He is a change maker in his community. So just to conclude, I'd always say be inquisitive. A good organisation is always happy to answer questions about any range of topics to do with volunteering. Look at the imagery and the vocabulary used. Things are changing. I can promise you universities across this country are waking up to these arguments and are very interested to only engage with responsible organisations. And when you often point a young person in the responsible direction, they don't often go and choose something that isn't responsible. And as I say, young people are starting to ask many more questions, so don't be surprised to hear them. Apart from that, thank you, and thank you to Howard.
Thanks very much. It's really a relief to know that universities are stepping in and beginning to be a bit more careful about the things that they're recommended. Sally, from People and Places.
Afternoon, everybody. My name's Sally Grayson, and I'm co-founder and programme director. It's gone on to automatic. Sorry. Where is... Can I take it back? For some reason it's clicking, it's running through rather than staying. I want to be right back at the beginning there, and I want to be able to control it. We consider that we have responsibility to put the right people in the right places at the right time. Yeah. Okay. Because I purposely moved the timer out of the... but maybe not your copy. Sorry. We believe we have a responsibility to put the right people in the right places at the right time, as professionally and honestly as we can. But we also believe that volunteers have a responsibility. And the first responsibility they have is to do their research and ask questions of the sending organisation that they're researching to travel with.
You would not be herded out promptly at 12:30.
It seems to be all right now. It's not moving. Thank you. Sorry about that. Volunteers aren't asking the right questions. In fact, they hardly ask questions at all. A quote from a responsible tourism consultant who was working on the ground in Cambodia, researching the motivations of volunteers. For me, the very first question that a volunteer must ask themselves is, would I be allowed to do this in my own country? If the answer's no, then why is it okay to do it in somebody else's country? It might be okay. You might receive some training. But please ask that question first. Next question. Who knows about me before I arrive? And what do they know? If the project doesn't know anything about you until you turn up on their doorstep, and David's given some examples of register here, give us £200, and you're on the course. If the people that you're seeking to serve don't know about you, how can you have a relationship? How can they plan for your time together? What will I know about the project before I arrive? If you don't know where you'll be working and what your role will be before you go, how can you be prepared for your work? You need goals. You need to know what resources are there. You need to know about the people working on the ground at the project. You need to be trained in codes of conduct and cultural contexts. You need contact with previous volunteers, and you may well need training. These are bare minimums. Who decides what I'll be doing, and how do they decide? Responsible volunteer programs will respond to need, not create it. They will have identified the need in partnership with local people. They'll be able to demonstrate how they've identified that need, and they'll be able to demonstrate how they're meeting that need. We design programs by working with the projects, formalising their needs into a list of aims with suggested ways in which volunteers may be able to help them achieve those aims. Using the plan, we brief volunteers appropriately, and the plans inform our discussions with the projects when we're talking about the volunteers we're going to place. We provide the volunteers very early in the process with our development plans so that they can see how their contribution would fit into the bigger picture. And a new thing that we've just done, these plans are now available on our website. So anyone can clearly see what our goals are for our volunteer program. And we regularly review and update the programs, taking information from the projects and their report backs on the volunteers and reports back from the volunteers. Our volunteer program advisor has just returned from Peru after a month of doing exactly that. It's not enough to ask how the money's spent. You need to ask where it's spent. And in best practice, you would see how and where it was spent for every project. You wouldn't simply see a pie chart tucked away on their site somewhere saying these are the percentages that we spend. Product development, what does that mean? It could well include the chief executive's travel expenses. The chief executive works on the projects, so we'll put that in project development. What measures are in place for my safety and the community's safety? What briefings are you going to get? What codes of conduct are you going to be given? How are you going to be screened Are references required? What is the organisation going to do to make sure you're right, that their community will be safe with you? And what is the organisation doing to make sure you will be safe? Are they doing risk analyses? Do they have emergency procedures? Are they selling you, if they're selling as part of a package, the right insurance? Many volunteers do not know that most travel packages do not cover them from work. And as far as insurers are concerned, volunteering is unpaid work. What happens when I get home? What support will I get? Who'll see my feedback? What feedback will I get? And how will I know my input was worthwhile? So, to conclude, I quote Amy Robertson, whose book, Volunteer Vacations in Latin America, is worth reading. Finding a quality volunteer experience includes the responsibility to ask for accountability from the volunteer organisation. By asking the right questions, volunteers can better support well-planned, effectively executed initiatives that have a positive impact. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Sally. I'm sorry about the technical glitches there. Tricia Young, Sheffield Hallam. Nice to see you again.
Hello. I come to this from a totally different angle from the previous speakers, and probably from you as well, because for many years I was head of initial teacher training at Sheffield Hallam University, and those students were specifically primary and early years. So anybody who was going to train to be a teacher for ages of 3 to 11, I was responsible for. And part of my responsibility was organising group international placements. So we had placements in Australia, in France, in America, in Spain. And I was asked to go to South Africa. It was serendipitous. I was asked to go with a group of school children, and they were going to work with a school in South Africa to build a garden to help with the school's food programme. And so, of course, I thought about this for a long time, 2 seconds, and said, yes, I'm prepared to do this. I'll replan everything. And I went to South Africa with a group of 16-year-olds from quite underprivileged circumstances in Sheffield. And I was there wielding an axe, planting spec boom, and getting paid for it. So I knew at this point I was the luckiest person in the world. And then being from education, I thought, I want to get inside this school. I want to see what's happening. And so I asked if I could go and have a look at some of the lessons. And one of the teachers said to me, I want you to sit at the back of the classroom, and when I finish teaching, I want some feedback. Now, this was a very, very brave woman, because education in South Africa, in the townships, is in crisis. Many of the teachers were educated themselves during apartheid. Many of them were trained, if you can call it that, under apartheid. And the quality of the teaching in many schools, in many of the black township schools, is nowhere near as good as it would be in Britain. So that's the context that I'm coming to this. Sorry. Okay. I'm not going to go through these in great detail because people have already spoken about the considerations before, but after I'd observed this, one of the teachers teaching maths, I realised that if our students could come into the classrooms, then they would have something to offer. Some of the teacher trainee students would have lots to offer in terms of teaching. And they would also get an awful lot in terms of behaviour management, because the class sizes are between 50 and 60, there are very few resources, and the teachers there have incredible behaviour management strategies. So I knew that the students would be getting something out of it. I was impressed with the person who was organising the children doing the gardening. Everything was organised, the people on the ground had been consulted about it, so I knew that this person who'd got his heart into supporting the communities would be a good person to work with. I'll go through some of these other ones. So what did I think, at this point, what did I think the local community might benefit from? And number one was teaching strategies. A lot of the teaching was done by rote learning. So the teacher stood at the front with a blackboard, the children copied from the blackboard into their books. There was no interaction between child and child. The only interaction that took place was between the teacher and the rest of the class. And that's not how we train our teachers to teach. We think all our teaching in the UK is research informed, and this certainly wasn't research informed. We wanted to encourage the teachers there to plan for learning. We also wanted to do some development of English language. And one of the issues that I found was that the subject knowledge of the teacher who asked me to observe wasn't as good as it should be. So she was teaching maths, but actually she didn't know the maths herself. And that is the case in quite a lot of probably African communities as well, not all of them. Needless to say, the volunteers were going to learn an awful lot more than any of the teachers were going to learn in 4 weeks. One of the things that they have to do as part of their training course is to teach children for whom English is an additional language, and giving them an opportunity to work in one of the township schools. They had to do that because the first language of the children wasn't English. In fact, for some of the children, their English was pretty poor, and our students didn't know any Xhosa. So there was a real challenge here, and the students had to find a way of supporting the learners. Of course, there was behaviour management strategies, 50 to 60 children with very few resources. No PowerPoint presentation, which a lot of our teachers rely on now. One of the important things was, why is the situation this way? Let's do some research about the political environment in which this situation grew up. What can we say about the political environment in our home country? What effect does that have on teaching and learning? And another one, of course, was independence and resilience. Okay, so some of the questions that needed to be asked were, well, what does the local community do about all this? Can we just go along and the local community doesn't know about us going in? Actually, the Trust has a committee made up of people from the local community, and schools within the local community are wanting to join the Trust. Now, Paul, who leads the Calabash Trust, he won't let any school join, because if all the schools that wanted to join did, there would be too many schools and we wouldn't be able to do anything. So there's only a very few schools who've shown commitment to developing practice. David's spoken about getting permission from the university. This was incredibly difficult. We were sending students to another country, and most of the time we have agreements between ourselves and another university, and we know that they're sharing the same values and they've got the same risk assessments and things are going to be supported. If things go pear-shaped, everything will be looked after. But with a new organisation, it was very difficult to prove to the university that this was going to be risk minimised and totally safe. And if anything did crop up that wasn't safe, what was the organisation going to do about it? Because our students are very precious. It would actually be not good for marketing purposes if anything went wrong. That's the bottom line as far as the universities are concerned. So what was going to happen about emergency support and ongoing support? In terms of marketing, I used to run the open days as well, and I used to say to the students, to the prospective students, if you come and join this course, there is a possibility that you can go to South Africa. And that was really good, because some of the students later said that was the one reason why we came to your university. And from that moment, we started planning how we were going to get some money for it. So that was a really, really good marketing opportunity. After the first year, then we didn't need to worry about whether we were going to get students to go on this volunteering programme, because when they went back, when last year's students went back, they just sold it. So once you've got the ball rolling, then when that's easy. The students concerned about the finances, we told them that it would cost about £2,000 in total, and that would be for the accommodation, the transport, the flight. There is a holiday involved in this, which I'll talk about in a minute. Anything, but not the bungee jump and not the shark cage diving. That was probably, more than the £2,000, and of course that grabbed them as well. Anything that was dangerous, they wanted to do. The students had to apply to go on the programme. They had to submit a written application saying why they wanted to go, what they thought they could get out of it, what they thought they could contribute. They were also interviewed, and the purpose of the interview was to check that we'd got a group of people who could get along together. We did have some people who we thought they're not going to cope in South Africa. They're not resilient enough. They're not showing enough oomph. And we did tell them that they weren't appropriate at this point. Actually, we sent them to America, because that was for those sort of people. We had a lot of seminars before they went about the expectations. What did they think they were going to do? Well, of course, in the beginning, they were going to save the earth. They were going to change the whole education system of South Africa. They were going to get all these children in the classes to speak perfect English. They were going to get all the teachers to do lots of good teaching strategies. And we had to make them be a little bit more realistic in the end. We asked them to do a lot of research about what sort of things are being taught. Have a look on the web. What's the curriculum? See if you can plan for anything to do with that, and make some resources. Make some resources, or fund some resources, or get somebody to give you some money and we'll buy some resources. The bit about team building was the holiday. The students, although they came from the same two courses, didn't really know each other. And because they were going to go into quite a challenging situation, they had to learn to get on together. And so that they had a holiday before the 4-week placement. They had a 5-week holiday, but by the end of which they knew each other incredibly well. And when challenges did arise, and they were there to support each other. So the students had 4 weeks in school and 1 week of holiday. When they got to Port Elizabeth, they had an orientation, so that they were shown around some of the townships in which they'd be working. They were shown some accommodation. It was basic accommodation. It was good accommodation. It was clean and it was well serviced with 24-hour security. The volunteers had transport to and from schools, and because the same drivers took the volunteers to and from schools each day, there was an incredible rapport that was building up. And that was very good in case things weren't happening in school according to the way in which the students expected. So at the end of the day, if things had gone wrong in school, the students would be moaning about it in the van, and the drivers would go straight back to the organiser so that he was made aware and he could step in immediately. So nothing was left to go wrong for any length of time. The schools were identified, and the students were put into schools according to their strengths. And so that was done at the university. The students could not choose who they were in school with or which school they were going to go into. They could choose who they lived with, but they couldn't choose which school they were in. Each week there was a formal review session, and that consisted of the volunteer students, the teachers in schools and the principals and Paul, who came from the trust, and everybody could talk about any of the issues that had arisen in the week, even if they'd been solved, and also what might happen during the following weeks. In terms of emergency support, all the students were given a mobile phone. So you need to think about what's going to happen in case something goes wrong. We've only had one incident while this has been happening the past 5 years, when two of the girls were mugged and their handbags were stolen. They actually got them back, but the students were offered counselling immediately. This is about measuring the impact. It's really, really difficult to say what the impact is. We know that for some of the teachers, they're using some of the strategies a year on when the following year students go. I just want to talk to you about two of these incidents. The first year, towards the end of the placement, some of the students came to me and said, Tricia, we've got to talk to you. The principal's been asking us about what happens in the UK. We can't tell him everything. He's got to come to the UK. We want to make him come. And you know how it is at the end of a holiday, and you've had a wonderful time, you've got lasting relationships, and you've fallen in love and you'll never fall out. This was one of those moments. And I said to them, oh, all right, you'll get the money and I'll put him up if he comes to Britain. And I knew that nothing would happen. And 6 months later, he's here. And he's here and he's talking to one of the heads in Sheffield, finding out how those children are supported. So that's a major impact. Tamba went back to school in South Africa. He got some teaching assistants. He got some parents and some young unemployed people from the locality, and he put them in the classes to support the teachers. And on the following year, he asked the students who were in school to give a training session to these teaching assistants who were supporting the teachers. That is amazing. It was never planned for, never ever planned for. The second one is something that often happens when students and volunteers go out. They reorganise the library or they paint a wall. You know, anybody can paint a wall. You don't need somebody to paint a wall, but a lot of volunteers feel that there's a need to paint a wall. These students didn't. Some previous students had painted a wall. But one year, the students cleaned up the library, and they used some of the learners in school to do it. And at the end of that, without anybody saying anything, these children picked up books and sat on the floor. And it was the first time that those children had ever read for pleasure. And we couldn't have planned for that. I'm sure a week after we left, the library would have been in a terrible, untidy state. But for a few minutes, we had some impact there. We don't know what the impact is in children's learning. Every year, there's a formal review from the volunteers, from the students, from the principals who've hosted the students, from the people at the university. The students feed into this. And every year we say, OK, what can we do better next year? And it is getting better and better and better. And the final thing I want to say to you is that it has to be a leap of faith. There has to be trust from all the parties for this to be a success. And this was a leap of faith of the longest bungee jump in the world, which was in South Africa. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Tricia. We've got one more presentation, and we are definitely coming to the floor for questions.
Great. Hi, I'm Daniela, and I have a PDF. Here we go. Okay. So I am going to talk to you about three things. It's 4 listed on here, but I'm going to give you a little bit of my background, mostly focusing on a few mistakes that I made that hopefully will be useful for you. And tips for travelers and tips for people that are planning trips. I took out the disaster stuff because, A, I feel like you've probably heard enough about We're not seeing it. I'm seeing it. You're not seeing it. There we go. Okay. So you didn't even know that there was 4 things on the list. I didn't even tell you, but I feel like you've probably heard enough about the travel company that hired a pedophile to run their orphanage tourist visits, or painting interior paint on the outside and losing it all by the time it rains the next day, and things like that. So we'll skip that, and we'll just give some personal tips and some personal stories and tips. 2005, I organized a bike trip across Cambodia, and we funded the construction of a school, thinking we were going to change education, and quickly realized that schools don't teach kids. Neither do pens, pencils, and books or T-shirts, it turns out, but we gave away a ton of them along with books, and we built about 6 schools before we finally realized that you need to invest in people in order to put those things to use. So our nonprofit shifted from all about things to investing in people. But at the same time, well, you can't raise as much funds investing in people sometimes, because you don't get to write your name on the side of the building like you do in your nice friends' faces who let you write on them. But one of the things that we'd done at the beginning was we had volunteers. And so we'd had these volunteers that could come over and teach English and hand out bikes and hand out books. But improving access to quality education in Khmer is not something a bunch of Americans can really get off a plane and help with. So what we realized is we need to switch from painting things and building things and giving things away to development, education, and dialogue, so that the people who traveled with us could leave and improve the world after they left. So not about saving the world in a week, but about what we do after that. We realized that in order to do that, we had to actually shift our vocabulary. It can't be, I'm a volunteer, you're a beneficiary. The second I get off a plane as a volunteer and you're a beneficiary, I'm in a position of superiority that I haven't earned. We also are using words like villagers. I'm from the village of Briarcliff Manor in New York. Nobody has ever called me a villager. Wipe that from your vocabulary if you're not willing to call me one. Right? So we realized we have this vocabulary that was completely this power dynamic just before people had even gotten off the plane. So we were looking at what words should we be using. In volunteering, in North America, we often say service learning. So this idea in academic institutions that it's about serving and learning, and we said we need to flip that on its head. It shouldn't be, I get off the plane and I say, hi, I'm here to serve you. Oh, I'm going to learn, by the way. It should be, hi, I'm here to learn from you how I might be of help, maybe now or in the future. Hi, I'm here to learn from you. You're the one who speaks the language, knows the place, has been here, knows what's going on. Who am I to say, hi, I'm here to serve you, help you, when I don't know those things? So we started using that vocabulary based on this idea that we have to learn before we can help. And we want to shift this idea of sympathy, these ads selling volunteer travel to our kids that are showing poor kids that you can hug, right? We need to be teaching empathy, and in order to teach empathy, we need to help people understand what someone else's shoes are like. Therefore, they need to get into those shoes and understand that before they decide that they're pitying somebody else, right? So here are my tips. I got 5 for the travelers and 5 for people that are organizing trips. So number 1, if you're looking for a volunteer trip, I think the first thing to do is say, how are people marketing this? If this is how they're marketing, a sense of pity, a sense of poverty, don't sign up. If they're making things that are complicated seem easy, and I don't have time to get into this, but there's not a single well in Cambodia that provides clean water. Very, very, very few. And if it is, it's next to a clean river, which is also very few. Right? Clean water. Anyway, we're not going to get into that. But point being, if you're simplifying these things down to say, oh, if you give these bed nets away, you're going to save people from malaria, provide clean water to a village, come give a pump. Those things are not true. We're dumbing down development, and we're teaching our kids the wrong thing. So don't sign up for something that says that, and don't sign up for a program that makes you the superhero. Right? If it's all about you and how you can save, help and save, and it's not about actually the reality that this stuff's difficult and it's going to be hard and you're going to learn a ton and you're going to be assisting if at best, don't sign up. Okay, number 2, the all-inclusive anywhere, anytime volunteer buffet. It's like a Chinese buffet. You don't know how long those plates have been sitting there and what sort of mold is growing in them. If an organization is selling everywhere, everything, you can sign up any day for our trips. Is that what you want? Do you want to be signing up for something where any foreigner can come off the plane and hop in and teach for a few days? It's not responsible. And if this is what you're selling right now, don't worry, we'll get to thinking about what that could look like on the other side. Okay, number 3, if you're looking, I think there's a false dichotomy around, oh, if I go on a volunteer trip that's about development, that's altruistic. But if I go on this learning trip, well, that's selfish, right? We got to give extra benefits to the volunteer. Totally wrong. Personal and global development are entirely interlinked. And if your students or you are looking to go abroad and you want to have an impact on the world, if you know what you want to have impact on, you might say, actually, the first thing I do before I start to get off a plane and try and help someone is I want to learn about it. I want to read some books. I want to travel and learn. I want to meet people. And then maybe you're going to go do an internship or work, or maybe you're going to become an advocate at home for changes that you can make abroad. It's connected, and they're not separate. Okay, number 4 is make sure it's not just about asking past people who went on that trip or the person who works in that company. Ask other people in that country what they think of that organization, and ask other people who work in that sector. So if it's a water organization, whatever it is, ask someone else and says, hey, what do you think about this organization? Because I know you work in that field. If you don't know people, there's something called Twitter. Use that. Reach out. There's online. Okay. And educate yourself. We started an education platform called learningservice.info. We have videos and we have a checklist for people. Impact International is an amazing website that we already heard about today. Because this is what we think is happening. We think that the community has a project. They're saying, hey, world, we need a volunteer, and then the volunteers get to fill that. But it's usually backwards nowadays. And I've seen the volunteer sector grow. I lived in Cambodia for 6 years, and let me tell you, it's like this. We've got a bunch of people who've already paid our money. Can you take them? We need to place these people. It's driven backwards, right? So if you don't want to be part of this, right? If that's not what you want to be a part of, you got to do some research. People who know me would know that my biggest thing that I chime on about is children are not tourist attractions. This is a website by Friends International and Child Safe. You can read about that. And orphanages.no. We cannot be selling children through these volunteer placements in orphanage. It is harmful. I know there was already a panel about this. Remove it from your trips. Do not sign up for one. This is causing harm. Go to these websites if you want to learn more, or come chat with me because I can go on it for an hour. Oh, here we go. Okay. How should the trip organizers prepare? I love this idea. Has anyone here that's IT, not IT related, tried to design a website, and you go talk to someone who does IT, and you're like, so I kind of want the website to go like this and go like that, and it's just going to spin around, and then they should be. That is the kind of Dunning-Kruger effect, which is, I love this definition, cognitive bias resulting in illusory superiority. When we know nothing about something, we think it's really easy, right? So all of a sudden, we think development's really easy. We're just going to send people abroad, and they're going to help. It's so easy. No, it's not easy. Just like it's not easy to make your little website spin around, okay? So we've got to view this not as the best thing on the travel sector is this volunteering. It's actually the tiniest intervention on a development spectrum on the other end, and we've got a lot to learn about development if we want to do this right. Okay? If you run a travel company, or if you are in a university and you're selling, putting these trips together, have, use, and listen to your contacts on the ground. Not the people who are your program people, other people that you know on the ground. Not just once when you set up the trip, but all the time, checking in and listening. I've talked to so many travel companies and said, listen, you are funding a corrupt group. When they've reached out to me, it's very, very hard to change people's mind. You need to listen and be open to the feedback you're getting and seek out more, right? Okay, if you don't know your projects, rethink what you're doing. You might end up looking like this. You might end up looking like this. But if you don't start to really know where you're placing people, if I can have anything to do about it, and a lot of people up here, you're going to look like this. Because soon enough, travelers are going to realize that It's not good enough to just pay money and be sent abroad to do something that's sometimes causing a lot more harm than good, and often for their own benefit and nobody else's. Okay, last thing. There's this phrase in Khmer that says, if you plant papayas, you can get mangoes, right? If we continue to treat and teach travelers that this stuff is easy, we will not have a next generation of people who are able to step up and face the big challenges that are facing our future, right? So we need to be honest about the impact people are going to have. We need to be honest that they're going to learn, or else we are setting the future up for failure. So same thing for the people organizing. Educate yourself. I already gave some other resources. We have some volunteerism one, some of the ones that you heard. And remember, you vote with your money. So vote for organizations that count, and you also vote with your voice. If you know if things are not going well, we need to speak up, and we need to talk about these things. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much indeed, Daniela. We've got a roving mic. It was almost inevitable it was going to be somebody right on the other side of the room. Off you go.